Hello and welcome to this special observance of Constitution Day, September 17th. This observance has been created by the Barry M. Goldwater chapter of the Arizona Sons of the American Revolution. In addition to making this available to you, our chapter members, and your families, we're inviting other organizations, including local American Legion chapters, schools, and assisted living facilities, as well as other veterans organizations, to observe and help us spread the great respect we have for our Constitution and the freedom and individual liberty and inalienable rights God-given, so eloquently affirmed in our Bill of Rights and our Constitution. I'm Bob Denny, a compatriot of the Barry Goldwater chapter. I hope you enjoy this presentation and that you invite other family members, friends, and organizations to share in this veneration of our Constitution. I hope to convey in this narrative the complexity and enormity of the struggle to develop a country that is of the people, for the people, and by the people. Once we declared our independence on the 4th of July, 1776, the work began. Each of the 13 colonies had their own independent ideas and were wary and reluctant to part with their own self-interest and governance. It was clear the new nation had a tremendous task ahead to form a consensus of states, to create a union of common areas upon which the states could agree. It took over 11 years, between 1776 and September 17, 1787, for the state representatives to ratify the final version of the American Constitution. Even then, a number of prominent statesmen didn't think the Constitution went far enough in protecting the individual from the government. It became clear the struggle to add a Bill of Rights would continue. It would take another 4 years to see a Bill of Rights become part of the Constitution. There's a pretty good chance that you've never heard of George Mason. By founding father standards, this Virginian has largely been overlooked. But if it weren't for Mason, the Constitution might never have been given its venerated Bill of Rights. By the way, back in 1776, Mason was part of a committee that drafted Virginia's Declaration of Rights, stating, "All men," the finished product said, "are by nature free and independent and have certain inherent rights, namely the enjoyment of life and liberty." Sound familiar? It should. As everybody knows, Thomas Jefferson would write another, more famous declaration that year, the Declaration of Independence, which contained much of the wording from Mason's Virginia Bill of Rights, or Declaration of Rights. When he did so, he was heavily influenced by the document Mason spearheaded. Okay, fast forward to 1787. With the Constitutional Convention wrapping up in Philadelphia, Mason strongly argued that a Bill of Inalienable Rights should be added. This idea was flatly rejected by the state delegates. At the wrapping up of the Constitutional Convention in 1787, Massachusetts Representative Eldridge Gerry made a motion to include a Bill of Rights. George Mason seconded it. Mason argued that a Bill of Inalienable Rights should be added. In 1776, Mason was part of a committee that drafted Virginia's Declaration of Rights. The finished product stated, "All men are by nature free and independent and have certain rights, namely the enjoyment of life and liberty." Sound familiar? Much of this wording and thought ended up being in the actual Bill of Rights of the United States. At the wrapping up of the Constitutional Convention in 1787, Massachusetts Representative Eldridge Gerry made a motion to include a Bill of Rights. George Mason seconded the motion. Unfortunately, the idea was flatly rejected, and both Mason and Gerry refused to sign the completed Constitution. Shortly following the Constitution's approval, Thomas Jefferson sided with George Mason and offered written comments to his friend James Madison, who wasn't yet convinced of the need to add a Bill of Rights. Thomas Jefferson wrote, "I do not like the omission of a Bill of Rights," he wrote. "Let me add that a Bill of Rights is what the people are entitled to against every government on earth." John Adams, who would go on to become Washington's vice president, like Jefferson, was also a huge proponent of adding a Bill of Rights. He was away in Great Britain when the Constitution was being created. Upon reading its contents, however, Adams proclaimed, "A Declaration of Rights I wish to see with all my heart, though I am sensible of the difficulty in framing one, in which all the states can agree." Obviously, this was a very daunting task to get a Bill of Rights that everyone would agree upon. James Madison initially saw no point in creating a Bill of Rights. He explained his position to Jefferson in October of 1788, writing, "In my own opinion, has always been in favor of a Bill of Rights. At the same time, I have never thought its omission a material defect." But Madison eventually changed his tune, and after becoming a congressman in 1789, he formally introduced the amendments that would comprise the current Bill of Rights. But before he could introduce the Bill of Rights, Madison first had to defeat James Monroe. Madison won his seat in the U.S. House of Representatives after running against Monroe, who would later become his Oval Office successor. Both candidates acted with civility. In fact, while on the campaign trail, the two of them regularly dined together and often shared sleeping quarters. Originally, Madison presented 19 amendments. On August 24, 1789, the House greenlit 17 of the 19. That September, the Senate made some heavy edits, trimming these down to an even dozen, which the states then looked over. In the end, numbers 3 through 12 were approved and collectively became 1 through 10 of our Bill of Rights on December 15, 1791. As we all know, George Washington was America's first president. He served in office from April 30th, 1789 for 8 years to March 4th, 1797. One of the key events of his presidency was the adoption of the Bill of Rights, which consisted of the first 10 amendments to the U.S. Constitution. The Bill of Rights were ratified on December 15th, 1791. I think Patrick Henry's quotation that I'm going to read in a minute is really representative of what makes our Constitution unique amongst all constitutions around the world. Patrick Henry went on to say, "The Constitution is not an instrument for the government to restrain the people. It is an instrument for the people to restrain the government, lest it come to dominate our lives and interests." Patrick Henry. I think that pretty much sums it up. Regarding the Bill of Rights, I think most of us, if we were asked, would say, yes, I know what the Bill of Rights is. It's the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. And that's correct. And I'm sure almost all of us know about the First Amendment and the Second Amendment, possibly the Fifth Amendment, but I doubt very many of you really could state what the Third Amendment is about. It's one of the least, in fact, I don't believe it's ever been litigated, because it simply says, "No soldier shall in time of peace be quartered in any house without the consent of the owner, nor in time of war, but in a manner to be prescribed by law." If I would have been asked to quote that, I honestly couldn't have. But it's important, and I would invite each of you to refresh yourself and to make sure that this is passed down to your children and that this has gone over. This is a good time. This is what this holiday is all about, is to refresh ourselves to the Bill of Rights, what went into creating it, and how important they have become and how unique they are. The inalienable rights not given to us by the Constitution, but declared in the Constitution as inalienable rights given to us by God. So that's quite refreshing. So with that, I'll leave this, and that would be a good assignment for each of you to get a copy of the Bill of Rights, either online or in a brochure or whatever, and review them with your family, your kids, students, etc. The delegates to the Constitutional Convention signed the final version of the United States Constitution on September 17, 1787. That was over 11 years after the Declaration of Independence in 1776. It wasn't until 1911 Iowa became the first state to recognize the anniversary of this date as Constitution Day. Then in 1917, a committee formed by the Sons of the American Revolution started promoting this day. In 2004, the federal government passed a law enacting September 17th each year as a federal holiday. On this day, all federal agencies and publicly funded educational establishments are required to provide educational programming on the history of the American Constitution. When Constitution Day falls on a weekend or another holiday, its observation is moved to the closest weekday. At that time, Congress changed the designation of this day to Constitution and Citizenship Day. But wait, there's more. Remember when I talked to you about Representative Madison presenting 19 amendments, and that on August 24th of 1789 the House greenlit 17 of them? Then in September the Senate made some heavy edits, trimming those down to an even dozen, which the states then looked over, and in the end, numbers 3 through 12 were approved collectively and became our Bill of Rights 1 through 10. Well, an undergraduate student got one of those axed amendments actually ratified in 1992. Better late than never. The second proposed amendment would have restricted Congress's ability to give itself a pay raise or cut. No law that tweaked the salaries of its members would take effect until after the next Congress had begun. Sensible as this idea sounds, the amendment wasn't ratified by the required 3/4 majority of the U.S. states. So for 202 years, it was stuck in limbo. Enter Gregory Watson. His roller coaster-like journey with the dormant proposal began in 1982. Then a student at the University of Texas, Watson was researching a term paper when he discovered this congressional pay amendment. As he dug deeper, the underground found it was still technically pending before the state legislatures. So Watson mounted an aggressive letter-writing campaign. Thanks to his urging and hard work, state after state finally ratified the amendment until, at last, over 38 had done so. After a bit of legal wrangling with Congress, on May 20th, 1992, the Constitution was updated to include as its 27th and most recent amendment. Watson, by the way, got a C on that term paper. Thank you for your participation in this observance of Constitution and Citizenship Day. And to all you U.S. citizens, naturalized and born here, we thank you. We hope you enjoyed this, and most of all, I hope you'll pass it along to friends and family, other veterans groups, teachers, schools, wherever they might like to have this to present to further revere the Constitution of the United States. I leave you with this quotation from our second president, John Adams, as it sums up the purpose of this presentation. A constitution of government once changed from freedom can never be restored. Liberty once lost is lost forever.